There's a sickness spreading through America's commercial streets. You can see it in the papered-over windows, the peeling paint, the empty parking lots baking in the sun, and the for lease signs that hang like tombstones. We're told this is the retail apocalypse, a simple, clean story where the online giant Amazon killed the old-fashioned brick-and-mortar store. But that's not the whole story. That's not even the real story. The truth is far darker, and it's a lot more deliberate. It's a story of corporate greed, unimaginable debt, and a slow-motion heist that has been happening right under our noses for decades. The neon lights are flickering out, one by one, not just because of progress, but because of a parasitic system that found its way inside, hollowed these companies out from the inside, and left behind a rotting shell. And now, that entire system is collapsing under its own grotesque weight. It all started with a giant, the original Amazon, a company so dominant, so trusted, it was woven into the very fabric of American life. That company was Sears. For generations, Sears, Roebuck & Co. was where you bought everything. It started in the late 1800s as a mail-order catalog, a 500-page book of dreams that could deliver anything from a pocket watch to a sewing machine to an entire house-building kit to your remote farm. It was the internet before the internet. When America moved to the suburbs after World War II, Sears moved with them, building massive, windowless anchor stores that became the heart of the new American invention, the shopping mall. They sold you your first bicycle. They sold you your first television. They sold you the Craftsman tools in your garage, which came with a lifetime warranty. You break it, they give you a new one, no questions asked. They sold you the unkillable Kenmore washing machine that lasted 30 years. Sears wasn't just a store. It was a promise. It was permanent. It was forever. But forever has a way of ending. By the 1990s, the giant was wounded. It had grown arrogant and slow. New, more nimble competitors were eating its lunch. Walmart was cheaper, with a logistics system that looked like magic. Home Depot had a better selection of tools, and its staff actually knew what they were talking about. Best Buy dominated electronics. Sears was stuck in the middle, a jack of all trades in an age of specialization. Its stores were old, with stained carpets and dim, flickering fluorescent lights. Its technology was ancient. It was bleeding cash. And that's when a man named Eddie Lampert made his move. Lampert was not a retailer. He didn't know how to sell a socket wrench or a refrigerator. He was a hedge fund manager, a Wall Street financier, a disciple of Ayn Rand, who believed in the absolute, ruthless virtue of self-interest. And when he looked at Sears, he didn't see a beloved American icon. He saw a pile of assets to be liquidated. In 2004, Lampert engineered a merger between his dying Kmart chain and the wounded Sears. He proclaimed it a brilliant turnaround, a new retail empire. But it was a lie. It was a smash and grab. Lampert's grand strategy was to starve the stores of cash. While Walmart and Target were investing billions into upgrading their stores, building state-of-the-art websites, and streamlining their supply chains, Lampert funneled Sears' money into stock buybacks. This is a financial trick where a company buys its own stock to make the price go up. It creates no new products, opens no new stores, and hires no new employees. It's financial engineering that makes the company look healthier on paper, while enriching shareholders like Lampert himself, while the business itself rots from the inside. The stores fell apart. Roofs leaked. The cash registers ran on software from the 1990s. In some stores, employees had to use yellow legal pads to track inventory because the computers didn't work. But it gets crazier. Lampert's one big idea for innovation was to run Sears like a hedge fund. He broke the company up into more than 30 different divisions: appliances, clothing, tools, e-commerce, real estate, and he forced them to compete against each other. This wasn't friendly competition. This was a blood sport. The appliance division was told to fight the electronics division for ad space in the Sunday Circular. The clothing department saw the hardware department as an enemy. If the tool division wanted to use the Sears website, the e-commerce division would charge them an internal fee. It was corporate cannibalism, a Hunger Games strategy that created chaos, paralysis, and bitterness. It was like telling your left hand to fight your right hand. The only winner was the floor. While this internal war raged, Lampert performed the final act of his heist. He began asset stripping. He sold off Sears's crown jewels, the valuable brands that customers actually trusted. He spun off Craftsman Tools, selling it to Stanley Black & Decker. He sold off the best real estate, the land the store sat on, to a new company he created called Seritage Growth Properties. And then, Lampert had Seritage charge Sears rent to stay in its own buildings. It was a vampire landlord, sucking the last drops of blood from its host. By the time Sears filed for bankruptcy in 2018, it was a hollowed-out carcass. It had been picked clean. This wasn't a failure of retail. It wasn't Amazon. It was a controlled demolition, an inside job. Eddie Lampert, the man who drove a 100-year-old company into the ground, walked away a billionaire. Tens of thousands of workers lost their jobs, and their pensions were gutted. The fall of Sears wasn't just a closure. It was a warning. The wolves were inside the house.
And what happened at Sears was not an isolated case. It was a playbook that would be used to murder another American icon, Toys R Us. If Sears was the store for the American family, Toys R Us was the store for the American child. It was a magical place, a category killer that invented the toy superstore. The endless aisles, the bright colors, Geoffrey the giraffe, the I don't want to grow up jingle. It was a core memory for an entire generation. You didn't just go there to buy a toy, you went there to experience toys. But in the early 2000s, it made a fatal mistake. It saw the rise of the internet, and instead of building its own e-commerce business, it decided to partner with the enemy. In 2000, Toys R Us signed a 10-year exclusive deal to be the only toy seller on Amazon. It was a deal with the devil. Amazon, in a move that shocked no one but Toys R Us, immediately let other toy sellers onto its platform, claiming they were a different category. Toys R Us sued and eventually won, but the damage was done. It had wasted a crucial decade, the most important decade in internet history, letting its online muscles waste away while Amazon grew into a monster. By 2005, the company was vulnerable, and the wolves smelled blood. And here's where the story gets truly unbelievable. In 2005, a trio of private equity firms, Bain Capital, KKR, and Vornado Realty Trust, bought Toys R Us. They used a tactic called a leveraged buyout, or LBO. Now, you need to understand what an LBO is, because it's the weapon that killed half the stores on this list. A leveraged buyout is like this. Imagine you want to buy a $1 million house. You put down $20,000 of your own money, and you borrow the other $980,000. But here's the trick. You don't put the mortgage in your name. You put it in the house's name. You move in, and you immediately take out a second mortgage, pay yourself a massive consulting fee of $500,000, and then you force the house to pay the bills for both mortgages. The house can't do it, of course, so you stop paying for repairs. The paint peels, the roof leaks. You sell off the copper pipes and the hardwood floors for scrap. Finally, when the bank comes to foreclose, you just hand them the keys. The house is a worthless, collapsing shell. But you? You walked away with $500,000. That is exactly what happened to Toys R Us. The private equity firms bought the company for $6.6 billion, but they only put up about $1.3 billion of their own money. The other $5.3 billion? They borrowed it and put it directly onto the Toys R Us balance sheet. Overnight, this healthy, profitable company was suddenly drowning in debt. It was now forced to pay over $400 million every single year just in interest payments on the debt used to buy it. All the money that should have gone to building a website, to lowering prices to compete with Walmart, to upgrading the dark, dingy, warehouse-like stores was instead vacuumed up to pay the interest on its own buyout. The PE firms also charged Toys R Us hundreds of millions of dollars in advisory fees for the privilege of being bled dry. For 13 years, the company slowly suffocated. They tried turnarounds. They tried adding play zones, but they had no money. They tried improving the stores, but there was no budget for paint. When it finally filed for bankruptcy in 2017, it wasn't because kids stopped liking toys. It was because it couldn't pay the bills from a party it was never invited to. 30,000 employees lost their jobs. When they asked about their severance pay, they were told the cupboard was bare. Just weeks later, the executives who oversaw the bankruptcy paid themselves millions in bonuses. The private equity firms, they had already made their money back, and then some. They murdered Geoffrey the Giraffe in cold blood. This pattern of debt-fueled destruction became the new normal. It's what killed Radio Shack, a company that comically missed the rise of smartphones and the maker movement it should have owned, only to be bought by a hedge fund that used it as a cash machine until it evaporated. But not every company was murdered by Wall Street. Some committed suicide. And the most spectacular recent example is Bed Bath & Beyond. For decades, this store was a powerhouse. It was a category killer for home goods. Its gimmick was simple: a big blue wall of endless merchandise, stacked to the ceiling. It was a treasure hunt. You went in for a towel and came out with a pasta maker, 3 scented candles, and an as-seen-on-TV gadget you never knew you needed. And then there was the second gimmick, the coupon. That big blue and white 20% off one-item coupon. They were everywhere. They never expired. It was like the company was allergic to making a full-price sale. This model worked great in the 1990s and 2000s, but it had 2 fatal flaws. First, the stores were a mess. They were intentionally cluttered, but when Amazon and Wayfair came along with clean, searchable websites, Bed Bath & Beyond stores just looked like a hoarder's garage. Their own website was a clunky, unusable disaster. Second, that coupon became an addiction. Customers were trained to never ever pay full price. This destroyed the company's profit margins. They were selling items for barely more than they paid for them. It was a race to the bottom, and they were the only ones racing.
In 2019, the company tried to save itself. It brought in a savior CEO from Target, Mark Tritton. His big plan? Get rid of the coupons and get rid of the famous brands people actually came for. He wanted to replace Cuisinart, KitchenAid, and OXO with the store's own private label brands, generic junk nobody had ever heard of, with names like Owned. It was a catastrophe. He took away the 2 things people liked about the store, the brands and the discount. Sales didn't just fall, they plummeted off a cliff. Customers walked in, looked for their favorite coffee maker, saw a wall of generic, owned by Bed Bath & Beyond boxes, and walked right out. Then the pandemic hit, and the supply chain crisis meant those new private label goods couldn't even get on the shelves. The company was burning through cash. In a final, bizarre twist, it became a meme stock in 2022, with GameStop's Ryan Cohen buying in, hyping it up, and then dumping his shares for a massive profit, leaving amateur investors holding the bag. By 2023, it was over. Bed Bath & Beyond, a company that once dominated home goods, filed for bankruptcy and liquidated all its stores. It wasn't murdered by private equity. It was a slow, bumbling suicide by 1,000 bad decisions. The death of these giants, Sears, Toys R Us, Bed Bath & Beyond, created a new problem. It started a domino effect. These stores weren't just stores, they were anchors. The entire business model of the American shopping mall was built around them. Here's how it worked. A mall would have 3 or 4 massive anchor stores, like Macy's, JCPenney, and Sears. These anchors paid very, very cheap rent. In fact, some barely paid rent at all. Their job was to generate the foot traffic. They were the main draw. Then the mall owner would charge insane, sky-high rent to all the little stores in between, the Sunglass Hut, the Sparrow, the Victoria's Secret. But what happens when the anchors die? The foot traffic disappears. The parking lots are empty. And those little stores can't justify paying $100,000 a month in rent when nobody is walking by. So they leave too. This is the dead mall phenomenon, and it's why the next wave of collapses is happening. Sears, the crown jewel of American department stores, the name behind the Thanksgiving Day parade, is in a death spiral. It's a zombie retailer, a company that's already dead but doesn't know it yet. After years of bleeding sales, it announced in 2025 it would close 150 of its underperforming stores, nearly a third of its total. It's trying to pivot to smaller, Market by Macy's stores, but it's like trying to turn a cruise ship in a bathtub. Its rival, JCPenney, is in even worse shape. It already went through bankruptcy once in 2020. It only survived today because the mall owners who bought it out of bankruptcy need it to stay open to pretend their malls are still alive. Walking into a JCPenney today is like visiting a museum of 2005. And then there are the smaller stores that depended on that mall traffic. Remember Forever 21? It was the king of fast fashion in the 2000s, building massive two-story stores filled with cheap, trendy clothes. But that model is dead. First, mall traffic collapsed. Second, it was killed by even faster fashion. Online giants like Shein and Temu, operating out of China, can design, create, and ship a new trend in days for half the price. They don't have to pay rent on a 50,000 square foot store in a dying mall. So Forever 21, after a first bankruptcy in 2019, is now in full retreat, closing hundreds of locations. The party is over. The same LBO playbook that killed Toys R Us also came for Claire's, the teenage jewelry store. It was loaded with debt, suffocated, and filed for bankruptcy, a hollowed-out shell of its former self. One by one, the lights are going out in the Great American Mall. You thought that was bad? We've only talked about discretionary items, clothes, toys, home goods, stuff you want. The next wave of the collapse is far scarier. It's hitting the stores you need. We are now watching the collapse of the American pharmacy. CVS and Walgreens. These two companies are literally on every street corner in America. For decades, their strategy was saturation. They built a CVS across the street from a Walgreens and both across from a Rite Aid. They were betting on convenience. But that era is over. In 2025, Walgreens announced it will shut down 2,150 stores, nearly a quarter of all its U.S. locations. CVS is in the middle of closing over 1,100 stores. Their smaller rival, Rite Aid, is in even worse shape. It filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and is shuttering hundreds of stores just to survive. So what is happening here? It's a crisis from all sides. First, their main business, the pharmacy, is being squeezed to death. The real power in healthcare isn't the pharmacy, it's the pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. These are the shadowy middlemen companies that negotiate drug prices between your insurance and the pharmacy. And these PBMs, including one owned by CVS itself, have systematically slashed the reimbursement rate. That's the tiny fee the pharmacy gets for actually filling your prescription. It's been cut so low that for many common drugs, the pharmacy actually loses money every time you fill your prescription. They used to make up for it by selling you other stuff, the front of store, the shampoo, the greeting cards, the candy, the batteries. That's where they made their real profit. But that business is dead. Amazon sells you shampoo. The dollar stores sell you greeting cards. Walmart sells you batteries. Nobody goes to Walgreens to shop anymore. You just run in for your prescription and run out. And now you can even get your prescriptions from Amazon Pharmacy or Mark Cuban's Cost Plus drugs.
You combine this with soaring rent and rising labor costs, and you have a recipe for disaster. But wait, this next part changes everything. Add in the explosion of organized retail crime. This isn't petty shoplifting. This is a new, alarming trend of organized gangs walking into stores with trash bags,
clearing entire shelves of high-value items like cosmetics and medication, and then walking out. In some cities, managers report losing thousands of dollars per day. The stolen goods are then resold, often on Amazon's own third-party marketplace with near-total anonymity. The stores lock everything up, turning the aisles into a fortress of plexiglass, which just annoys real customers and sends them online. The business model is completely broken. For Rite Aid, it was even worse. The company was not only crushed by debt and PBMs, but it was also facing a tidal wave of federal lawsuits for its alleged role in illegally filling hundreds of thousands of opioid prescriptions, fueling an epidemic. The result of these thousands of closures is terrifying. It's creating pharmacy deserts. In many low-income urban neighborhoods and remote rural towns, that local Walgreens or CVS was the only place to get life-saving medication. It was the only place to get a flu shot, to buy baby formula at 2 a.m. Now, it's gone. And millions of elderly and low-income Americans are left with no easy access to health care. The final, most terrifying chapter of this story is happening right now. The sickness has spread from toys to clothes to medicine. Now it's coming for our food. When grocery stores start to collapse, you know the system is fundamentally broken. This isn't the first time. Before Walmart, the king of groceries was A&P, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. In the 1950s, it was the largest retailer in the world, but it grew arrogant, failed to adapt to the suburbs, and was crushed under the weight of its own pension obligations and debt, finally dying in 2015. It was a warning. And now, the same thing is happening to Kroger. Kroger, the largest traditional supermarket chain in America, announced plans to close up to 60 stores, calling them unprofitable. How can a grocery store be unprofitable in a country of 330 million people who need to eat? The grocery business runs on razor-thin profit margins, sometimes as low as 1 or 2%. They make money on volume. But now, that model is under attack. They're being squeezed from the high end by Amazon's Whole Foods and from the low end by hyper-efficient European discount chains like Aldi and Lidl, who sell high-quality private label goods for a fraction of the price. And they're being crushed from the side by the two biggest players of all, Walmart and Target, who use their massive scale to sell groceries at near zero profit just to get you in the door. Add in rising labor costs, soaring energy bills to run the freezers, and the same organized retail theft that's hitting the pharmacies, and the model cracks. Kroger's answer? A massive $25 billion merger with its rival, Albertsons. It's a defensive move. They're trying to get even bigger to create a duopoly that can compete with Walmart. But regulators and shoppers are terrified this will just lead to higher prices and more store closures, creating even more food deserts where residents have no access to fresh produce. And here's the ultimate red flag, the final boss. Even Walmart, the undisputed king of retail, the master of logistics, is shutting down stores. In 2025, Walmart has closed multiple locations across the country, from California to Illinois. The company blames two things: unprofitability and theft. They claim that organized retail theft has cost them over $3 billion a year. When Walmart, a $648 billion behemoth, says it can't make a store profitable because of costs and theft, that is a terrifying signal. It means the American consumer is truly, completely broke. With 60% of households living paycheck to paycheck, even Walmart's everyday low prices aren't low enough. People are cutting back, buying only the bare essentials, or fleeing to online giants. Even the convenience store, that last bastion of late-night America, is dying. 7-Eleven is shutting down 444 stores. Why? Because the franchise model is broken. 7-Eleven corporate squeezes its franchise owners with insane fees. Here's the trap. 7-Eleven corporate takes its cut from total revenue, not from profit.
So even if the store owner is losing money after paying rent, utilities, and labor, 7-Eleven corporate still gets paid. Those owners, who are often immigrants chasing the American dream, are left with almost nothing. Many report making less than $40,000 a year after working 100-hour weeks. Eventually, they just break. They hand the keys back. The Slurpee machine goes dark. The retail apocalypse isn't one story. It's a perfect storm. It's the long-term rot of private equity firms loading companies with debt they never asked for. It's the inevitable, world-changing disruption of e-commerce. It's the catastrophic mismanagement from arrogant CEOs who were too slow and too stupid to adapt. It's the rise of new, faster, more ruthless online competitors like Shein and Temu. And it's the final brutal squeeze from a multi-year crisis of inflation, rising crime, and a middle class that has been hollowed out, downsized, and sold for parts. The empty stores are not the disease. They are a symptom. They are a mirror reflecting back at us the state of our economy. The for lease signs aren't just on the buildings. They're on the American dream itself.